Claire Henderson hadn't thought much about it at first. It wasn't rebellion, or even laziness. It was practicality. The townhomes in Meadowbrook Estates came with standard HOA-approved mailboxes. Black, narrow, and barely wide enough to squeeze. In a few letters, let alone the padded envelopes and cardboard boxes that marked her usual stream of online deliveries. Claire was an architect who worked long hours from home and the convenience of ordering supplies, books, and even the occasional impulsive midnight purchase online had become a lifeline. But every other day, she'd find packages crammed awkwardly, bent and bruised, or worse, dumped at her doorstep in plain sight of the street. Twice already, boxes had disappeared before she even returned from errands. One Saturday morning, while sipping coffee and scrolling through her design drafts, Claire sighed at the sight of a mangled delivery shoved into her mailbox. It was a book, bent like a crescent moon. "That's it," she muttered, setting the cup down. An hour later, she was at the local hardware store, standing in front of a row of mailboxes. She didn't go for anything fancy, just a slightly bigger model, still matte black, still modest but wider and deeper, functional. She paid in cash, loaded it into her trunk, and by late afternoon, she had installed it herself at the edge of her driveway. The numbers gleamed proudly. 47. She stepped back, hands on her hips, and admired it. For once, she felt relief. Maybe. Now her deliveries would stop arriving mangled like origami experiments gone wrong. But what Claire didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that in Meadowbrook Estates, nothing went unnoticed, especially not by the HOA. The letter came the very next morning. Claire opened her mailbox, with plenty of space for once, and found not a package but a crisp white envelope stamped Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Her stomach dropped. She had barely lived there 6 months and had already heard the whispers. The HOA here wasn't just strict, it was suffocating. Inside, the letter was short and sharp. Notice of violation. Resident of Lot 12, Mailbox number 47. You have installed a mailbox that is not in compliance with HOA-approved specifications. Effective immediately, you will incur a daily fine of $25 until the mailbox is removed and replaced with a regulation unit. Sincerely, Richard Cole. President Claire read it twice, blinking. $25? Per day, she muttered. That was absurd. For a mailbox? Shoving the letter into her pocket, she stalked back inside and pulled up the HOA handbook from the community website. It was over 100 pages long, full of tiny print and numbered rules. She scrolled until her eyes hurt. Sure enough, buried, under Section 9.3, Exterior Fixtures, Mailboxes, and Address Plaques, it stated, all mailboxes must be uniform, HOA issued, and maintained in identical design, size, and color. Claire groaned. She had read it before moving in but had brushed off the clause as harmless. Who cared about a mailbox? Apparently the HOA did. That evening, as she carried her trash to the curb, she noticed her neighbor, Mrs. Bailey, standing by her roses. The older woman gave Claire a sympathetic glance. "They got you already?" Mrs. Bailey asked softly. Claire frowned. "Excuse me?" "The letter." Mrs. Bailey's lips pursed like she was holding in more than she dared say. "That's how they start. You're not the first." Claire held up the paper in her pocket. "It's ridiculous. It's just a mailbox." Mrs. Bailey shook her head slowly. "With Richard Cole, nothing is just anything. He likes everything the same. Uniform, he calls it. Orderly." Claire raised a brow. "You make it sound like a dictatorship." "Call it what you want," Mrs. Bailey whispered, glancing around nervously. "But people don't cross him. Not for long." Before Claire could ask more, Mrs. Bailey retreated inside, shutting her door with a finality that made Claire's skin prickle. The fines started piling up immediately. Day 1, $25. Day 2, $50. Day 3, $75. By the end of the week, Claire owed nearly $200 for daring to want a slightly larger mailbox. She tried reasoning. She emailed the HOA board, explaining her problem with packages. She pointed out that her new mailbox was still black, still neat, still aligned perfectly with the curb. No reply. She attended the next HOA meeting in the community clubhouse. The room was filled with folding chairs, coffee urns, and the low buzz of restless neighbors. At the front sat Richard Cole, a man in his late 50s with neatly combed gray hair and a pressed navy blazer. His expression was one of permanent irritation, as if the whole neighborhood existed solely to test his patience. Claire stood when the time came for community concerns. "I'd like to address the fines regarding my mailbox," she began, holding her ground. "It's functional, unobtrusive, and honestly safer for deliveries. The HOA rules on this are outdated. Can we consider an amendment?" Richard's eyes cut to her like a knife. He leaned forward, his voice smooth but laced with steel. "Miss Henderson, the rules exist for a reason. Uniformity prevents chaos. If one person installs a larger mailbox, the next installs a pink one, and before you know it, Meadowbrook looks like a circus." A ripple of uneasy chuckles went around the room, but no one dared support her. "It's not about colors or chaos," Claire pressed. "It's about practicality. You are out of order." Richard's voice boomed, final and dismissive. "Remove the mailbox or continue to incur fines. This discussion is closed." The gavel came down, just like that. Claire drove home that night with her knuckles tight around the steering wheel. Something about Richard's tone, the way the neighbors shrank under his glare, left a sour taste in her mouth. Yes, the fines were outrageous. But the bigger question gnawed at her. Why did a single oversized mailbox provoke such hostility? And why did Mrs. Bailey's warning echo in her mind like a bell? People don't cross him, not for long. Claire glanced at her sturdy new mailbox as she pulled into the driveway. Mailbox number 47 stood like a silent sentinel in the dark, gleaming faintly in the streetlight. She had no idea then that it would soon become the center of a battle far larger and darker than she could ever have imagined. The first time Claire met Richard Cole face-to-face outside of the HOA meeting, she wasn't prepared for how much presence the man carried. It was early evening, the sun slipping behind the row of manicured houses. Claire had just returned from work errands and was unloading groceries when she heard the crunch of footsteps on the pavement. She turned, and there he was, Richard Cole in his blazer despite the summer heat, his HOA clipboard tucked neatly under one arm. "Miss Henderson," he greeted, his voice smooth but carrying an edge that made it sound more like an accusation than a pleasantry. "Mr. Cole," she replied, forcing a polite smile. His eyes, a sharp steel gray, flicked toward her mailbox before settling on her again. "Still, haven't addressed the violation, I see." Claire crossed her arms, still waiting on a reasonable explanation as to why a practical, safe mailbox is considered a violation. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Uniformity is not negotiable. Rules maintain order. Without them, this community would unravel." She bit back a retort. The way he said unravel made it sound as if chaos lurked just outside Meadowbrook's iron gates, waiting for a chance to storm in. "Mr. Cole," she said instead, "I understand rules. I also understand when they're being used as a hammer rather than a guide. This mailbox harms no one. It simply accommodates deliveries." "Perhaps," he said, his gaze narrowing, "but accommodating one's personal indulgences at the expense of community standards is selfish." Claire bristled. "So protecting my mail is selfish?" Richard leaned slightly closer, his cologne sharp, his tone dropping to something silkier, almost mocking. "You seem like a smart woman, Miss Henderson. Do yourself a favor and comply. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." And just like that, he pivoted on his polished shoes and walked away, clipboard under his arm like a badge of authority. Claire stood frozen for a long moment, her grocery bags cutting into her hands, her pulse racing. There was something about him, something beyond arrogance, that made her skin crawl. A man too polished, too controlling, too invested in the smallest details of other people's lives. The fines kept coming. By the second week, she had nearly $400 in penalties stacked against her account. The HOA invoices were clinical, stamped with deadlines and late fees in bold red letters. Her frustration grew each day she saw her neighbors' identical mailboxes lined in perfect rows, each one a carbon copy of the next. Hers was the only one that dared to be different, and it hadn't gone unnoticed. Neighbors looked at her mailbox, then at her, with a mix of curiosity and pity. At the mailbox cluster one morning, a younger mother whispered to another as Claire approached. The whisper was followed by a quick, forced smile and averted eyes. It wasn't hostility, it was fear. At the next HOA community gathering, Richard commanded the room like a general. The clubhouse was neatly arranged, coffee brewing in the back, a plate of store-bought cookies on the counter. Every chair was filled. The agenda: updates on landscaping, pool rules, trash collection, and violations. Always violations. Richard stood at the front, listing numbers from his clipboard with crisp efficiency. Lot 19, grass exceeding regulation height. Lot 22, decorative, lawn ornament non-compliant. Lot 12, mailbox still in violation. Every time he said her lot number, Claire felt the eyes in the room swivel toward her, heavy with silent judgment. Uniformity, Richard concluded, his voice carrying authority, is not optional. It is the foundation of Meadowbrook's value. If you want to live here, you respect the rules. The meeting ended with murmured agreements and the shuffle of chairs. No one challenged him, not a single person. Claire lingered, watching how the neighbors filed out quickly, most keeping their heads down. Only one man, a wiry, middle-aged resident with ink-stained fingers, paused near her. He leaned just close enough to whisper, "Careful, Cole doesn't like loose ends." Before she could respond, he slipped away. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She paced her living room, the invoices spread across her coffee table, her mind replaying Richard's words, the way her neighbors looked away, the whispered warnings. Why? Such obsession with her mailbox? Why fines so excessive, enforcement so immediate? She opened her laptop and dug deeper. HOA presidents typically served without pay, a volunteer position. But according to public records, Richard had been president for nearly a decade. His personal home, a sprawling two-story with imported stone landscaping, was far beyond what his old job as an insurance adjuster should afford. Something wasn't adding up. Claire clicked through forum threads about Meadowbrook Estates. Most were harmless, complaints about lawn fines, noise ordinances, paint color approvals, but buried in the archives, she found a string of posts from former residents. Mail went missing constantly. Packages disappeared. HOA did nothing. Reported theft, but police said no leads. HOA told us not to make a fuss. Got fined for speaking out. Claire sat back, her chest tightening. Mail theft. Consistent. Suppressed. And here she was, the only resident whose deliveries had been arriving safely since she'd installed her oversized mailbox. It clicked like a puzzle piece snapping into place. Her mailbox wasn't just non-compliant, it was disruptive. It wasn't ruining uniformity. It was ruining something else. The following afternoon, Claire caught sight of Richard again, this time near the row of community mailboxes at the end of the block. He wasn't checking his own. He was standing there too long, clipboard in hand, pretending to make notes. When he noticed her watching from her driveway, his lips curved into that same cold smile. He tapped his pen against the clipboard, turned on his heel, and walked away. The message was clear. He saw her. He knew she was paying attention, and if she kept looking deeper, she might not like what she found. Claire's pulse quickened. For the first time since moving to Meadowbrook, she realized this wasn't just about a mailbox. It was about control, about secrets, and she had just stepped onto dangerous ground. The first package to go missing wasn't Claire's. It was a set of gardening tools Mrs. Bailey had ordered online. Claire noticed because she was walking her dog past Bailey's house when the older woman emerged, looking distraught, clutching a shipping confirmation in one hand. "They said it was delivered," Mrs. Bailey muttered, shaking her head. "But it's not here, not anywhere." Claire offered to help look around, checking the porch, the side gate, even the bushes in case some kid had tossed it aside. Nothing. Maybe it was stolen, Claire suggested carefully. Mrs. Bailey paled. "Shh." She glanced toward the street. as though even the suggestion was dangerous to voice. "Don't say that here," Claire frowned. "Why not?" But Mrs. Bailey only pressed her lips into a thin line and shook her head. "Just let it go. Please." Then she retreated inside, leaving Claire unsettled. 2 days later, it happened again. This time to the young mother down the street, the one who always hurried her toddler into the car each morning. Claire overheard her venting on the phone, voice sharp with frustration. "No, it says delivered. I was home all afternoon. Nothing's here. That's the 3rd time this month." The pattern was unmistakable. Packages across Meadowbrook Estates were disappearing like clockwork, but not hers. Every morning when Claire opened mailbox number 47, her deliveries sat safely inside. Padded envelopes, small boxes, even fragile items. None touched. None stolen. It didn't make sense, unless her oversized mailbox had disrupted someone's routine. That night, unable to shake her suspicion, Claire decided to watch. She brewed a pot of coffee, settled by her front window with the lights low, and kept her gaze on the street. Hours crawled by. The neighborhood went dark, houses lit only by the soft glow of televisions behind curtains. Around midnight, Claire stifled a yawn, ready to call it quits. Then she saw it, headlights cutting briefly across the row of mailboxes at the end of the block. A dark SUV rolled to a stop. The engine idled. Claire leaned forward, heart racing. A figure slipped out of the driver's seat, hood pulled over his head, moving with practiced ease. He strode to the cluster of mailboxes, glancing around, once before producing something metallic from his pocket. In seconds, he was working the locks, opening boxes, pulling out envelopes, slipping packages into a bag slung over his shoulder. Claire's breath caught. Mail theft, right in front of her. The thief moved quickly, methodically, until he reached her side of the street. His gloved hand touched mailbox number 47, tugged once, then again. But the larger mailbox had a different lock and reinforced slot. The thief cursed under his breath, gave up, and moved on. Claire's stomach twisted as she watched him continue down the row, unseen, unchallenged, until he returned to the SUV and drove off into the night. She didn't sleep a minute after that. The next morning, Claire stood by her mailbox, staring at it like it was suddenly more than metal and hinges. It was protection, a shield, and that made it dangerous. By noon, she'd mustered the courage to approach a neighbor she barely knew, Mark, the wiry man with ink-stained fingers who had whispered that warning at the HOA meeting. She caught him as he returned from his jog, earbuds dangling around his neck. "Mark," she called. He hesitated, wary, but waited. "I need to ask you something," Claire said, lowering her voice. "Has your mail ever gone missing?" His eyes flicked left and right, scanning the street. Then he gave a short nod. "Plenty." "Have you reported it?" A bitter laugh escaped him. "To who? Police?" "They came once. Said they couldn't prove anything." "HOA. They said it's not their responsibility." Richard shut down any talk of it. Claire's pulse quickened. "So it's been happening for a while?" "Years." He wiped sweat from his brow, lowering his voice further. "You think Richard doesn't know?" "He knows everything that happens in this neighborhood." Claire's breath caught. "Are you saying—" "I'm not saying anything," Mark interrupted sharply. "And neither should you. Trust me, you don't want to be on his radar more than you already are." Then he jogged off, leaving Claire standing frozen on the sidewalk. That evening, she found another envelope from the HOA tucked neatly into her mailbox. Final notice. Your fines now total $575. Failure to comply with mailbox regulations will result in legal escalation, including potential liens against your property. Her hands trembled as she read it. Legal escalation. Over a mailbox. But she wasn't afraid of losing money anymore. She was afraid of what she'd seen the night before. If Richard Cole wasn't just a controlling HOA president but somehow connected to the theft, it would explain everything. His obsession with uniformity, his hostility toward her oversized mailbox, the silence of her neighbors, Her mailbox had become an obstacle in his system, a system that worked only because every other mailbox was predictable, identical, easy to compromise. She couldn't prove it yet, but she could feel it in her bones. That weekend, Claire bought a discreet motion-activated camera online and installed it in a flower pot near her driveway, angled perfectly at mailbox number 47 and the street beyond. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As she tightened the last screw, she whispered under her breath, "Let's see what you're hiding, Mr. Cole." The oversized mailbox gleamed in the sunlight, solid and defiant, a quiet rebellion in a neighborhood where uniformity wasn't just expected, it was demanded. And Claire knew, with a chill, that sooner or later, Richard would realize she was watching back. Claire had replayed the footage a dozen times. The small camera she'd hidden in her flower pot had captured exactly what she'd hoped. The same dark SUV, the same hooded figure rifling through mailboxes under the cover of night. She watched frame by frame, heart hammering, as the figure tugged at her oversized mailbox and gave up, frustrated. And though the man's face was obscured, his posture wasn't. The way he carried himself, the set of his shoulders, the deliberate stride. It was uncomfortably familiar. Richard Cole. She couldn't prove it, not yet. But she felt the truth settling in her gut like a stone. For the next week, Claire became an observer. She started taking late evening walks, phone in hand, pretending to enjoy the night air while her eyes scanned the streets. She noted which houses received deliveries, which packages went missing, which neighbors looked defeated as they stared at empty porches. And always, Richard was nearby, if not in person, then through his shadow. Letters from the HOA, clipped notes about fines, violations, non-compliance. The more packages disappeared, the more letters filled her own mailbox. By Wednesday, she had accrued over $700 in fines, but the intimidation didn't stop there. One morning, Claire found a neon orange violation slip taped to her door. Notice: unauthorized exterior camera installation detected. All surveillance equipment must be approved by HOA board. Immediate removal required or additional fines will apply. Her blood ran cold. They knew. Someone had noticed her flower pot camera. Claire tore the slip down, hands shaking. The camera was small, barely visible among the petunias, yet somehow Richard, or someone working for him, had spotted it. The message was clear. "We're watching you too." That evening, she marched to Mrs. Bailey's house, determination overriding caution. The older woman opened the door a crack, relief flashing across her face before worry settled in. "Claire, you shouldn't—" "I need to know what's going on," Claire interrupted, her voice low but firm. "I saw someone stealing mail. I think Richard's involved." Mrs. Bailey's eyes widened in fear. "Don't say his name. Not here." "Why not?" "Because he finds out everything. Always." Her voice shook. "My husband tried once. He spoke up at a meeting about missing checks. The next week we were fined into the ground. The HOA threatened foreclosure. We couldn't fight it. We barely kept this house." Claire swallowed hard. "So, everyone just stays quiet?" Mrs. Bailey nodded, lips trembling. "It's safer." Claire clenched her fists. "It's not safe. It's theft. It's a crime. And he's using the HOA to scare everyone into silence." But Mrs. Bailey only shook her head, retreating into the shadows of her living room. "You can't win against him, dear. He always wins." The door clicked shut, leaving Claire alone on the porch, anger burning through her fear. That night, her camera caught something new. Not the thief, not the SUV, Richard himself. He wasn't stealing mail, at least not directly. Instead, he was inspecting the mailboxes, clipboard in hand, as though documenting violations under the cover of darkness. Claire zoomed in on the footage, her pulse racing. Who walked around with a clipboard at midnight? The cracks in his mask were widening. Determined, Claire dug deeper. She scoured county records, searching for anything tied to Richard Cole. After hours of scrolling through property tax databases and HOA filings, she found something odd. Multiple complaints filed over the years by residents about missing mail, quietly stamped "resolved" with Richard's signature at the bottom. resolved but never investigated. Then she noticed another detail. Richard had been re-elected HOA president every year without contest. No one ever ran against him. No one even tried. Control wasn't just his hobby, it was his empire, and her mailbox, oversized and defiant, was the first real challenge to that empire in years. The retaliation escalated. Claire woke one morning to find her tires slashed, deep gashes that left her car sagging on its rims. Inside mailbox number 47, she discovered not a package, but a folded note. Remove it, or next time it's not just the tires. Her chest constricted. Someone had been bold enough to leave a threat inside her mailbox. Bold or desperate. For the first time, fear outpaced anger. She double-checked her locks, kept lights on through the night, and carried her phone like a lifeline whenever she stepped outside. But fear didn't erase her resolve. It sharpened it. The breaking point came at the next HOA meeting. Claire walked into the clubhouse clutching a flash drive loaded with her camera footage, her violation slips, and her research. Her plan wasn't fully formed, but she knew one thing. Silence was no longer an option. Neighbors sat in their usual rows, quiet and compliant, while Richard presided at the front, gavel gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Order, please," he began, his voice smooth as ever. "Before we proceed with today's agenda, I must address a serious matter. Lot 12 continues to resist compliance. Accrued fines now exceed $1,000. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Claire felt the weight of 100 eyes on her. Richard's gaze locked with hers, cool and unyielding. "Miss Henderson," he said, his tone dripping with authority, "you are in violation of community trust. Remove your mailbox immediately, or further legal action will be pursued." Claire rose slowly to her feet, pulse thundering in her ears. "Actually, Mr. Cole," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "I think the community deserves to know why their packages keep disappearing, and why my mailbox seems to be the only one that stops it." The room went silent. Richard's expression didn't falter, but for the first time, Claire saw a flicker in his eyes. Something sharp, dangerous. She had found a crack, and she intended to split it wide open. The clubhouse meeting had ended in uneasy silence. Neighbors filed out quickly, their eyes darting between Claire and Richard as though caught between two storms. Claire sat frozen in her chair until the last person left, her laptop bag heavy. With the flash drive she hadn't dared to plug in yet. She had wanted to call Richard out, to show the footage, but the weight of the crowd's silence had pressed down on her shoulders. Not yet, she told herself. Timing mattered. But Richard knew. He had seen the defiance in her eyes, heard the edge in her voice, and now she knew he would come for her. The first sign was subtle. Claire's HOA account, where fines were logged, suddenly reflected new violations she had never received on paper. Claims of unapproved landscaping, noise complaints, even a charge for unauthorized exterior lighting. Total fines, $1,025. Her jaw clenched as she scrolled through the list. Every new violation was fabricated. A smear campaign designed to bury her under so much financial pressure that she'd either give in or break. Then came the phone calls. At first they were hang-ups, late at night, the line dead when she answered. Then whispers, breathing. AI, man's voice murmuring, "Stop fighting." Claire recorded everything, her paranoia sharpening into vigilance. She set her phone to auto-record, logged timestamps, even filed a quiet report with the local police. But the officer at the desk only sighed. "Ma'am, without clear evidence tying this to someone specific, there's not much we can do." HOA. Disputes are civil matters. Best course of action? Replace the mailbox. Replace the mailbox. As though that would solve the sickness festering beneath Meadowbrook's polished surface. The harassment escalated. One morning, Claire stepped outside. Defined rules keep us safe spray-painted in thick red letters across her garage door. Her stomach dropped as she stared at the dripping paint, the message like blood on her suburban home. Her neighbors avoided looking as they drove by. No one stopped. No one asked if she was okay. except Mark. He appeared that evening with a bucket and scrub brush. "It'll come off," he muttered, scrubbing beside her. Claire studied him. "You know what's happening, don't you?" His jaw tightened. "I know enough. Richard runs this place like a fiefdom. Packages go missing, checks disappear, credit cards get skimmed. People talk, but only behind closed doors. He keeps everyone in line with fines, threats, or worse." Claire swallowed hard. "So he's profiting off this. That's how he affords the house, the cars." Mark glanced at her, eyes hard. "And you're messing up his system. Your mailbox doesn't open like the rest. It's too secure. That makes you a problem." A chill ran down her spine. "Then I have to expose him." Mark stopped scrubbing, water dripping from his gloves. "You don't get it. People have tried. They lose their homes, their savings, their sanity. You can't fight him alone." Claire met his gaze. "Maybe not. But I'm not staying silent either." The very next night the warning came. She returned from the grocery store to find her front door ajar. Panic surged through her chest. She stepped inside cautiously, clutching her keys like a weapon. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Then she saw it. On her dining table, laid out neatly, like an exhibit, was one of her own packages, slid open with a knife. Inside, instead of the household supplies she'd ordered, was a single piece of paper. In block letters, "This is your last chance." Claire's knees weakened, but anger flared hot behind her fear. He had been inside her house, violating her space. Watching her, she called the police, voice trembling. But again their response was perfunctory. No signs of forced entry, nothing stolen. "Maybe a prank," the officer suggested. A prank. Claire hung up the phone with her hands shaking. She realized then that Richard had insulated himself well. Rules, bylaws, intimidation, and silence had built a fortress around him. If she wanted to take him down, she needed undeniable proof, and she needed to present it where everyone could see it. The next HOA meeting was in 1 week. Every day that week felt like walking a tightrope. Claire kept her blinds shut, double-checked her locks, and carried her phone like a lifeline. The SUV cruised her street more than once, slowing near her house before disappearing into the night. But she was ready. She gathered everything. Video footage of the thief at the mailboxes. Screenshots of the harassing HOA violations. Records of community complaints Richard had signed off as resolved. Photos of her slashed tires, the spray paint, the threatening note. She compiled it all into a single presentation, backed up on multiple drives, with copies hidden at Mark's house. When the night of the meeting arrived, she dressed not for battle but for clarity. Professional, composed, her laptop bag slung across her shoulder like armor. The clubhouse was full, the air thick with anticipation. Neighbors whispered, stealing glances at her as she took a seat near the front. Richard entered moments later, crisp blazer, polished shoes, clipboard in hand. His gaze swept the room, landing on Claire. His lips curled into the faintest smile, a predator confident of his prey. "Order, please," he said, gavel in hand. "Tonight we must address continuing violations, beginning with Lot 12. "Actually," Claire interrupted, standing. Her voice was clear, louder than she thought possible. "Tonight we need to talk about missing mail." The room stilled. Dozens of eyes widened, heads turning. For the first time, the silence wasn't in Richard's favor. It was waiting, questioning. Richard's jaw tightened. "Miss Henderson, you are out of—" "No," she cut in. "You're out of order, and I can prove it." She reached for her laptop, hands trembling but steady enough to connect it to the projector. The time for silence was over. The projector flickered to life, casting light across the clubhouse wall. A grainy video filled the screen, a dark SUV pulling up to the row of Meadowbrook mailboxes. A hooded figure stepped out, moving quickly, practiced. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Claire's voice didn't waver. "This was recorded outside my home. Whoever this is, they've been stealing from us for years." The footage showed the thief opening mailboxes one by one, stuffing envelopes into a bag. Then came the moment Claire had replayed 100 times. The thief tugging at mailbox number 47, failing and storming off. "That mailbox," Claire said, pointing to the screen, "is the only reason my packages haven't been stolen. Because it doesn't open like the rest." Murmurs erupted across the room. People exchanged glances, whispering to one another. At the front of the room, Richard Cole gripped his gavel tightly. "This proves nothing," he said coolly. "Anyone could have taken that video. This so-called thief could be anyone." "Then why?" Claire cut in, clicking to the next slide. "Does he walk just like you?" The room stilled. The video replayed in slow motion. The stride, the posture, the deliberate movements. Even through the hood, the resemblance was uncanny. "Coincidence," Richard snapped. "Circumstantial. If you think you can defame me in front of this community, I'm not done." Claire's voice rose above his. She clicked again. A new image appeared. Scanned copies of old resident complaints, all marked resolved in Richard's handwriting. "Years of residents reporting missing mail," Claire said. "Years of being silenced. Every complaint resolved without investigation. And look here." She pointed to the timestamp. "These reports stopped, appearing entirely 5 years ago. The same year Richard extended his presidency by rewriting the bylaws." Gasps again, louder this time. People leaned forward, eyes wide. Mark, sitting near the back, called out, "I filed one of those complaints. My checks were stolen. I was fined for bringing it up," others chimed in. "I lost packages too. My credit card number was stolen after mail went missing." Voices overlapped, anger rising like a wave. Claire clicked to the next slide. Photos of her vandalized garage door, her slashed tires, the threatening note left inside her mailbox. "This is what happens when you question him," she said, her voice steady though her heart thundered. "He intimidates, he fines, he threatens, all to keep us quiet." Richard slammed the gavel down. Crack. The sound silenced the room for a heartbeat. "Enough," he roared, his calm mask slipping for the first time. His face was flushed, eyes sharp with fury. "These accusations are baseless, lies from a woman who refuses to follow the rules. She is the violation here. She is the problem." But the tide had turned. For the first time, the neighbors didn't look at Claire with pity or fear. They looked at Richard, really looked at him, at the sweat beading his forehead, the desperation in his voice, at the cracks in his perfect polished mask. Mrs. Bailey rose slowly from her chair. Her voice shook, but it carried through the room. "My husband's mail was stolen. He tried to fight. We almost lost our home. Richard, you did this." Another neighbor stood, then another. Stories poured out. Missing mail, lost money, threats, retaliation. Years of silence spilling into the open. Richard's face twisted. He banged the gavel again, shouting over the noise. "Slander! This is slander! I'll sue every one of you!" But no one was listening. Claire took a breath, clicked one final time. The screen filled with the clearest frame from her footage. The hooded thief, mid-step, body angled just enough that the profile was unmistakable. Richard Cole. The room erupted. Shouts, gasps, accusations flying like sparks. "Call the police! He's been robbing us blind! All those fines, just to cover it up!" Richard dropped the gavel, panic flashing across his face. He started toward the exit, but two men from the back, residents long cowed into silence, stepped forward, blocking his path. "Not this time," one of them said coldly. The police arrived within the hour. Claire handed over the footage, the records, the threats. Neighbors corroborated, voices strong now that the dam of fear had broken. Richard was led out of the clubhouse in handcuffs, his once pristine blazer wrinkled, his face pale with fury and disbelief. The sight of him being loaded into the back of a patrol car sent a ripple of relief through the community. Years of quiet suffering had ended in a single night. In the days that followed, Meadowbrook Estates felt lighter. Neighbors spoke to each other again. Packages arrived and stayed where they belonged. The new interim HOA board revoked Claire's fines, issued apologies, and promised reforms. One afternoon, Mrs. Bailey brought over cookies and hugged Claire tightly. "You saved us," she whispered. "Mailbox 47 saved us." Claire smiled, glancing toward the curb. Her oversized mailbox stood tall, a simple, sturdy thing of metal and bolts. But it had become more than that. It was a symbol of resistance, of courage, of refusing to be silenced. For Claire, it was proof that one person, even just one, could crack the walls of fear and let the truth flood in. Weeks later, Claire received a small package in mailbox number 47. She pulled it out, smiling at the irony of how easily it fit. Inside was a handwritten note from Mark to the woman who didn't back down. "Thank you." She tucked it back inside, running her hand across the smooth black metal. For the first time since moving to Meadowbrook, Claire felt at home. And mailbox number 47? It wasn't just a mailbox anymore, it was a legend,